Well, hello, a very good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where in the world you are tuning in from. My name is Adrian Reed, and it is my real pleasure to welcome you to this BA Community webinar, where we're going to be discussing a topic that has been on my radar for quite a long time. And it's one of those topics that I've done a little bit of reading about, but I don't know anywhere near enough about. And judging by the number of registrations that we've had for this webinar, it's a really hot topic in the BA community as well. So we're going to be talking about liberating structures today. And I'm really pleased to say that we are joined by Carsten Lützen, who works at Lego, which, by the way, that must be a really cool organization to work for. I mean, you know, everyone loves Lego, right? So, Carsten's going to be presenting a presentation entitled Playfulness in Facilitation using Liberating Structures. Now, I'm not going to say any more about Carsten because I know I've had a preview of his slides, and he's got a nice intro slide where he'll talk a little bit about who he is and what he does. But just before I hand over, a few things I wanted to let everyone know if you are tuning in live. So first of all, and if you've tuned in live to one of these webinars before, this will come as no surprise to you, but just in case, I'm going to, in a second, pop a link to a mural board in the chat. And if you've not used Mural before, it's really, really nice, simple whiteboard. When you click on the link, you can just enter as a visitor, and you'll find I've set up a little mural board for you here. You can go ahead and connect with us on LinkedIn. There's handy links down here as well. But it's for collective note-taking. So when Carsten says something that particularly resonates with you, you can double-click and add a little note. Or you could even get visual and add all sorts of images and stuff like that. And the idea is this will be a bit of a collective note-taking. So we've got that ability to sort of share something from this session as well. So I'm just going to put a link to that mural in the chat. So if you are attending live, you'll be able to have a play with that mural as well. So I'd encourage you to put as many points on there as you can. However, I'm going to hand straight over to Carsten now, because I know you've got a lot to say to us. So thank you so much for being here, Carsten. And of course, if you're tuned in live, do ask questions and answers in the Q&A panel. Feel free to chat to each other in the chat panel as well. Say where you're from and and what you're interested in and so on. But Carsten, thank you so much for being here, and over to you.
Thank you. This is hopefully going to be fun. At least that was what I promised in the description, right? So I will share my screen, and I hope you can see it. And as Adrian also said, if you have questions, just write them in the chat or in the Q&A section, and I will try to keep an eye out and answer them as we go along. Just to put a bit of words on who I am. So as you probably have guessed, I'm Carsten Grønbjerg Lützen, which is a really fun name to write for non-Danes. And I am an agile coach at the Lego Group, or whatever we call it. I do quite a lot of different stuff, but the underlying thing is always something that gives me energy, or something that helps the teams or the products to improve. So that's actually quite nice. I have a wife and 2 kids, and I have an ICF certification, which is the International Coaching Federation, which is quite interesting for me because my background is actually as a computer scientist of all things. So I did a master thesis within chem informatics, and then taking the step to facilitation and coaching is rather big. I also teach at the University of Southern Denmark, where I teach software engineering, which is software architecture, tests, how do we structure processes in IT, and so on. So quite a lot of strange stuff. I have a fond love of dad jokes, so sorry if there are some stupid puns. Sorry, not sorry, probably. And then I share weekly content on LinkedIn and YouTube, where you are more than welcome to follow me or reach out if you have questions or ideas or things you would like to hear about. But What we are going to look at today, or I am going to talk a bit about today, is, as you might have guessed already, we started out with a little bit of about me, and then we are going to look a bit into this liberating structures thing. What is that? Why is it something different? How can it be used? So just a quick introduction to that, and then some of the concept in liberating structures, like the concept of strings, which we will get somewhat familiar to, hopefully to make it easier for you to construct your own strings. Then we're going to look at one of the most fundamental mechanics, which is the 1-2 for all, and how that is the foundation for quite a lot of the different liberating structures. When we have looked at these two things, then we are going to look at different structures. So just a quick, what should we say, tour about or on different structures. What are the commonalities? There is quite a lot of structures, so I'll just cover some of them high level, and then hopefully you can get some energy from trying them out later. Then, just to say, this is not just an academical exercise. I'll just share some real life strings I've used in my work, and put a few words to these to give you some idea of how can you put them together to hopefully get what you want. Then probably the half hour or so is up, so we are going to do some wrap up and then some Q&A at the end of the session. That's at least the plan. So let's see. So if we look a bit at what the liberating structures is and what it is not. If we have two axes like this, and one of the axes is that we have one in control of content, that is what we have right now. I'm deciding what we are looking at. I am in control of what is being said. Then on the other end we have many in control of content, and that means that we are doing some kind of group exercise or some kind of group work or plenum work where a lot of people are talking. And then on the other axis, if we have one shaping actions, that is again me. Right now I'm deciding what we're doing. I am being a dictator, managing both the control of content and also the shaping actions. And on the other end we have many shaping actions. So we have a group of people, or more than one at least, that decides what are we going to do, what are we doing. Then we can try to plot in the ways of facilitation we already know. So as I already alluded a bit to, this is me. So this is when we are doing presentations. It doesn't get much more one way than that. I am talking and you are somewhat forced at least to listen. Some of us has, or if not all of us, has also seen a status report. So we have somebody giving status to a manager or the likes. We still have a bit more people in control of content, but it's still rather one way. Manage discussions, for instance, as well. They also, that became a square for some reason. That is down here still. It's not really collaborative. We have one that runs the discussion. If we're doing a brainstorm, one person probably set up some rules or some tone, so for a question we should look at. So then we would be here. If we have an open discussion or a free-form discussion, that would be here. I guess you start to see where this is going. So we are very much in this side of this quadrant, of these quadrants. Liberating structures in general is over here. So it's a toolbox that helps to facilitate different structures, meetings, workshops in a way where we try to get as many people talking as much of the time as possible, without, of course, people just talking to be heard or hear their own voice, or people just saying things that are not really relevant for this. There is 33 structures, and there's also official structures. There's also a couple of structures in development that you can find on liberatingstructures.com, which is actually where you can find information about all of these. But if we then look a bit of what does a liberating structure, what makes it special, what makes a liberating structure, then we can divide it into these 5 different design elements. First off, we arrange the space. This can be quite physically, so we need to have chairs in groups of 3 in a big room, or we need to have a big floor space, or we need to have a big floor space with a giant cross on the floor, or we need to have chairs in circles in 7 to 9 people, or whatever. So we always have something around how do we arrange the space. Then making the invitation for this exercise that we're going to do is quite important as well. So how do we make sure that people feel invited to participate? We are never forcing them, we are inviting them and trying to pique their curiosity, pique their interest into pitching in. So when you facilitate with liberating structures, you use quite a lot of time on making good invitations, trying to figure that out, and you try also to do that in advance, to have that ready. Then we distribute participation in smaller groups or to individuals, again depending on what exercise we are running. Then we have a sequence of steps, and we use that to allocate time. So we actually have a pretty good idea of how much time will this exercise take. And then we also configure groups. So is this something that we do in pairs or individuals or groups of 3 or groups of 9, or how are we doing this? All of this is always specified in liberating structures, and that is quite nice if you do not want to be super creative, but you can just I want to achieve this. Okay, then probably this liberating structure would be a good idea. When we are then doing bigger workshops and we want to not just do one structure, we start to talk about strings. And when I plan a workshop, I often ask the organizers or somebody that knows what this workshop is about. So if I ask you after this workshop, what made this the best workshop ever? What are the participants going to answer? What would you like them to answer? And with that, we can start to build the initial string or the primary string. So if we want to get that output, then this would probably be the way to go. But when I plan, I might also have alternatives or optional structures to use instead. So it can be that we have one perception of where we would like this to go, but in reality people had a completely different perception of where to go. So we also, when we plan, often have the alternative flows. So it might be that if the discussion goes in this direction, then this structure would be better instead, and then followed up by this structure, and then we can go back here, for instance. Again, it depends, but when we have these optional strings, it gives us some flexibility and some freedom to quickly adapt to the session and how it's going, which is super, super nice. A lot of these liberating structures do not require you to have 7 flip charts or 7 PowerPoints ready. A lot of them, if you have at least prepared for the main sequence, the main string, and then the alternative strings you can often just facilitate by talking. And as you might have seen on this, a liberating structure is just like a box. It takes some input and gives some output, and then we work with that. But one of the most classical liberating structures that I also use probably most of the time is this 1, 2 for all. You can use this online if you're in the room. You can use it to answer big questions, small questions. The fundamental idea is just you start out by asking a question, so something that you would like the participants to think a bit about. Then you give them 1 minute individually and in silence to reflect upon this. And that is simply to help the introvert people get some time to make up their mind, if we are really stereotypical in our view. And then after that 1 minute, you ask people to pair up. And this helps the introvert to talk out loud, so they have said something out loud, build up some kind of a confidence in what they're saying is actually good. And also the more extrovert people, actually some people just think better when they're talking, and they have that opportunity in these 2 minutes. When we have done that, we go to the group of 4, so that is the 4, and that is where each group have 4 minutes to just quickly recap what did they talk about, any commonalities, anything. And then lastly 5 minutes in plenum, where the entire group talk together. So what did we hear, anything that stands out and stuff like that. And a lot of the structures are using some kind of dynamic like this. It can also be that online, for instance, 1, 2, 4, and then all might not work. Then you can do 1, 3 all, or 1, 4 all, or something like that, using breakout rooms in Teams or Zoom or whatever you're using. And then the more we get people to talk, that is always my goal when I facilitate, the more I can get the participants to talk, then I need to talk less, and they will hopefully feel more empowered and more invested in the actual session. So when we are doing like this, when we are trying to create an inclusive environment using liberating structures, a lot of the structures that we can use are super awesome. We just need to pick out which structures to use. And I don't know if you can see my camera, but I have some more or less like playing cards like this that I use when I plan. So I physically put them on my table and then figure out, so what string should I use. And one of the structures that I often use is this what so what now what. I will also write it soon on the slide, which is a great one for debriefing, either in a so-called retrospective, or if we have had a shared experience, we have seen something, we have run a test, we have had an important meeting, then what are we going to do with that? So with that, first off, we ask the question what. So what happened? What did you observe? We do that first individually and in silence, then in pairs, then in groups of 4, and then in plenum. So what facts can we collect about this shared experience? What did we see? What did we experience? What did we feel? And then the next one is easier for some. That is the so what. And that is where you try and channel your inner teenager. So what? Why is this important to me? Why should I even care, right? And then you do that again in 1, 2, 4 all, so individual, in pairs, in groups of 4, and then in plenum. So why is this important? And then we slowly get everybody to talk, everybody to pitch in, and then we have a quite good view of why is this important for us as a group. And then lastly, to make it actionable, then we do the now what. So with the facts that we observed, our inner teenagers channeled, then what could we do now? What steps is actually would be a good step for us to do? And then we have a beautiful list, again individually and so on, that we can then go out and work on. And we also know why we did it, because we had the so what, which is also mentioned in the chat, and that I think is quite strong. And that is just one way where this 1, 2 for all structure works quite brilliantly. There's also another one called critical uncertainties, which is one of my favorite ones as well, where we have a 2 axis in a continuum, like we also saw in the beginning. So it can be uncertainties. Sorry for typos. If, for instance, we have on one end that we want to work as individuals, and on another end we want to work as a group, and on the other axis we have, so if management set direction or if we set direction, then we have 4 quadrants we can visit, 4 quadrants we can dive into. So how do I recognize that we actually in this quadrant? What can we do in this quadrant that would make sense. Where would we like to be? And have a lot of talks about that. And then you if you are physically in a room, you make like these axes on the floor, the bigger the better, and have people walk around and look at it from different angles, and that's quite nice. Another one that's also quite nice is something called eco cycles or eco cycles, where we look at what ideas are we having that we have not yet invested in? What ideas have we invested a bit in but not yet mature? What are the mature things we are doing where we really harvest a lot of value versus creative destruction, where we need to, what are the things that we should stop doing and find another way of creating that value? And then there is a lot of pretty nice thing about that. Again, take some tape and do this big infinity sign on the floor. I did that in the team I was part of at one point, where we were an innovative department or an innovative team. And when we did this exercise, more or less all of the things that we were doing was in the mature phase. So we did not have that many ideas. We were not actually being that innovative that we thought we were. So how can we then free up capacity in this eco cycle to do that? Now you might think, for obvious reasons, that everything in liberating structures is centered around this 1, 2 for all, and that is not the case. So some other examples of this is Troika Consulting, and there you might have guessed we are in groups of 3, and in these groups of 3 we do help each other. So we have one client that pitches a problem that they're facing, and then we have 2 consultants that then tries to give input. But the nice thing here is that when the client has pitched the idea or the problem, had maybe 1 or 2 clarifying questions, then the client turns it back to the 2 consultants and trying to mimic being a statue, not showing any emotions, like giving small hints by raising a shoulder or nodding or shaking the head. Just sit there and observe, take notes, while the consultants are talking about this specific problem or issue. And that is super awesome. And then you take turns doing that. And you do not need to know all the details. It's actually quite nice to do with somebody outside your own department or outside your team. And that is brilliant. And if you haven't tried it, really try to do it with people. We had Troika Tuesdays at one point, where we would do Troika consulting with each other, simply to try and get some input from other angles that we did not see. The next one is something called impromptu networking. Some of these structures, for instance, like impromptu networking, you might already know, maybe by another name. So impromptu networking is basically just talking in pairs. So you ask a question, and then, or actually, you ask people to find somebody to talk to, and then everybody finds a partner, and then you give them a question. It can either be a fun question or a more serious question. And then if you use this as an energizer, then I would really recommend you to do and use some kind of a tiebreaker to figure out who goes first, to build up this psychological safety. So that can be, for instance, who has owned the most fish, or who has traveled the longest to get here today, or whatever rocks your boat. Just try to stay out of people's age, weight, and so on. That is probably not a good way to go. But then when people have talked about that 1 minute, you can hear when the volume is going down in the room, then you ask people to find a new partner, and then you give them a new prompt. And it can be anything from what do you hope to see in the session today, to what is the biggest experience you have had in this job or this role, or what is your favorite TV show. It depends quite a lot what we use it for. And if you're really adventurous, there is a structure in development that's called back-to-back, where you like literally lean against each other, and then you can say face-to-face and people turn around. Again, being playful with that, trying different ways of getting people to talk. If, for instance, we are going to do some kind of team setting, where we set goals, then something called Conversation Cafe is brilliant for that. It's a quite structured discussion, if you also think back on the managed discussion, but with a purpose, where you do 3 rounds. First round, after you've of course given them a prompt somewhere, something to answer, is everybody gets 1 minute of uninterrupted speaking time to say what's on their mind. That's the first round. Second round, everybody get a possibility to give feedback to what they heard, again uninterrupted, and you can say I'll pass. Third round is a free discussion without the talking stick or talking token, but as a facilitator I always maintain the right to introduce it if I either see somebody blabbering over everything and not giving time or space for other people to talk, or if I see somebody hiding. And that's usually enough. Then people will behave and actually give time for people to talk, and then we can talk about it, and then at the end do a 1-2 for all to figure out what are the takeaways from this discussion. But in that way we can limit the airtime for people and make sure that we have a good ratio between the different participants, and that is quite nice. Last structure for this, I don't know how many of you have been doing dot voting in some form or another, but odds are that you have tried different ways, either in a Miro or mural or physically putting dots on the things. So a different way of doing that is something called crowdsourcing, where people individually and in silence write on a piece of paper the idea that they're having, the idea that they think we should look into. So if you were 10 times bolder, what action would you then propose? And then you write it on a piece of paper, and then you walk around switching papers with other participants, reading what's on it and switching papers, and then when a timer goes off, you read it, you turn it around and rate it from 1 to 5, and you continue to do so a couple of times, 3 or 4 times, and then at the end you have a beautiful crowdsourced list of ideas that you can then have calculate the sum, and then you have a prioritized list with quite a lot of views on it, and then we can take that into a conversation cafe or into another structure called purpose to practice to see how can we make this more tangible or easier to work with or whatever. And again, you have 33 structures, and this is just some of them that I have used quite a lot. And to give you some ideas of examples is this. I did a workshop together with, it's okay if it's too small to read, with one of my good co-workers, friends, Flemming, where we did a best hopes first, which is actually from the solution focused coaching. I already used it. So when we ask you at the end of this workshop day, what would make this an awesome use of your time or an awesome workshop? Then have people to do that individually and in silence, put it up, and then we as facilitators know what to do, or hopefully what are the goals that people want to get out of this. Then there is a structure called MAT-T, which is a liberating structure and development, where you stand in 2 circles and then answer prompts as well. Then we did something not liberating structures. Again, you can mix and match as you want. Then we did a product fair, which is actually a liberating structure called shift and share, where you can think of it as a science fair where you rotate around in the room and visiting different stations, getting different types of input, which is quite nice. Then appreciative interviews is another liberating structures. And then we did this what, so, what, now, what that I already covered. And then we did some closing. Then on day 2 we did Panarchy, which is the eco cycle, the one with infinity signs, but in different levels. So doing one on the individual level, team level, department level. So where are we having the main of our effort or energy going? Then the now, what, so, what, and so on. Then we did Troika consulting, and then we revisited the best hopes. I also did a session with another one where we talked about a team goal. So we did some impromptu networking at first, and talking about different social things. Then appreciative interviews, where you share something that you're proud of. Then conversation cafe. So with these positive things we shared, what are the commonalities? What stood out to you? What are the things that we could take and use as a team purpose? Then 15% solutions. So that's a nice structure for how can we create good first steps that we can do without extra funding, extra hours, extra resources. And then Troika Consulting again to take these 15% solutions and try to get people to talk about them, spar with each other. How can we make the good first step? This one back-to-back listening, which is where you stand like in impromptu networking, but back-to-back listening to a piece of music. And then you're asked to describe it for your partner. And then you switch places, like physically switch places, and then you'd listen for the things that your partner listened to, and then talk about that. So again, training empathy in people. Best hopes, drawing together, which is another liberating structure where we try and use 5 simples for creating a message without using words. That can be quite abstract for a lot of people, but again, it's just a great way of communicating instead of talking all the time. Crowdsourcing, as we already talked about. Open space, that I guess some of you also know. And then we did some presentation and some voting. Then we have one last example, which is from a trust workshop I did, where we did a variation of Mad Tea called Mad Love, where you, for the questions you ask, use the 36 questions to fall in love without saying that it's that. And then you have people talk about that. So if you could ask anyone for dinner, who would that be, and so on. And then at the end, so we are of course here today to try and form ourselves as a department and really get to know each other. So if anybody actually knows these questions, and there might be one that knows them, and people always laugh when you tell them that they're actually the first questions of 36 questions to fall in love. Tris, which is a nice way of stopping counterproductive behavior. Heard, seen, respected. Also another one where you, again, around empathy, share stories where you did not feel heard, you did not feel seen, or you did not feel respected, and then trying to learn from these situations. So how did that shape us? How did that impact our way of working, our way of acting? And then we used that to come up with some 15% solutions to try and make sure that did not become the norm. So we've actually been going for roughly half an hour. So my idea and my really urge to you is just go out and try them. Go to liberatingstructures.com. Read articles from the Liberators, which is Barry and Christian, which they have like pretty good facilitation guides where you do this, then you do that, then you ask that question, then you wait for this, which is quite good. There's also a Liberating Structures app that is also okay. Or try to get a hold of some of these playing cards. I like them quite a lot because they have quite precise steps. So what do you need to ask when? What is the timing, and so on. So it's quite easy to plan out entire days with liberating structures. And then really start simple. Start out with the 1, 2 for all. Try it out in a meeting, and it's super, super awesome. And then we have some questions. I've seen 2 in Q&A. One is, or Adrian, do you have anything before we jump into?
No, well, I was just, thank you so much, Carsten, for a really inspiring and interesting presentation. Just before we go to Q&A, I just want to very briefly, I'm just going to share the mural boards. This will very briefly stop your share.
Yeah, it's fine. I don't have more to share, maybe.
Fantastic. So so people have been very busy. So you should be seeing the mural board now, and so people have been taking screenshots, adding some of the. So we've got like the the 3 Ws, Troika Consulting on there. So thanks to everyone who's been contributing to the mural board. I will create a PDF of this and share it on LinkedIn. So keep your notes, keep your notes, a form of crowdsourcing of notes going on there as well. So great. Okay, so let's have a look at the Q&A. And remember, if you have questions, do either type them in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll cover as many as we can. So Carsten, the first question comes from Michelle, who says, I loved in the intro that Carsten talked about doing the things that give him energy. And she asks, what tips can you share to get more energy from our work? Which I think is an excellent question.
To be completely honest, I'm quite lucky, I think, privileged with the team I'm in. So the team I'm in, we are supporting the entire Lego group, and we work at the moment mostly reactive, not proactive. So people reach out to us and ask for sparring or help, and then we know that there is a sincere interest, that there's some sincere commitment behind it. And then if we also find energy and think that this is something that would be a good use of our time, then we go out and help. But there is often somebody in the team I'm part of that would like to do that. So what tips? When I was a developer, one of the best moments for me was in the team when we also started to be transparent and bring the entire self to work. So if we had something that was nagging us privately that would also impact our work performance, then we said it in the trusted space of our team. So I'm maybe not giving 100% because of this and that at home, which just was a huge relief for the rest of us to know why is this happening, or what is going on. Because that really made us more of a team, and that made us more, or that at least gave me more energy to actually work and help people, because I then understood what was going on, and that slowly that helped me a lot, at least.
Yeah, I think that's really important, isn't it, Carsten? And I mean, springboarding from that, I think sometimes if a team member has something going on in their life, if that isn't made, if there isn't that environment where they can disclose it, it's people can think that they've done something wrong. People can think, oh, that person's annoyed with me, but actually they're not. They're just having some stuff happen outside of work, so it's good all round. There were also a few questions, Carsten, about the technology you're using to do the live scribing there. So Rushma asked that, and also I think there was an anonymous question earlier.
Yeah.
So what kind of technology do you use? Because it is phenomenally effective.
I also wrote it so people have it on the first question that got. So I use my iPad with GoodNotes, a standard note-taking app on the iPad, and then I use a Reflector, a program that works both on Mac and Windows, to then mirror my screen to Zoom. You can, in fact, if I recall correctly, just plug in your iPad directly to your PC or Mac, and then Zoom can mirror the screen as well. Just legacy reasons why I use a Reflector.
Yeah. Fantastic. And in the chat, I noticed that Tim asks a question in the chat. Tim says, this is really good stuff, and would like to know more about TRIZ for dealing with counterproductive behavior. So I wonder if there's anything I'm sure you could talk about that for hours, Carsten, but anything briefly you could mention about TRIZ and counterproductive behavior.
The fun thing about TRIZ is there is a kicker. There is where you change the perspective, and even though you know it's coming, it still gets you every single time. So when we talked about trust in teams, we asked the question, so what could you do that would give you the least amount of trust in your team? And then people start, trash talking, sending stupid emails, excluding somebody from lunch, and so on, all of these things, right? And then people always find it funny, right, to write all these stupid things down. And then the kicker is when you then ask them, so take a look at that list, and on that list, what are we actually doing today, if you're completely honest? And that is an eye-opener for quite a lot of people, because even though we thought it was so silly when we wrote it, then maybe we're actually not good enough at making sure everybody knows that we're going to lunch. Maybe we have that one or two person that comes back from a meeting, then just find the entire office deserted or whatever it is, right? And even though you know that is the follow-up question, you always get caught by it. And then if people are honest, that can really help you to weed out some of this counterproductive behavior, because then all of a sudden we become aware that we're actually doing this, and then we can take it and figure out, so how do we stop this behavior going forward.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, Carsten, that's the sort of thing I'd imagine would really help build psychological safety, because, and I know that's become a very trendy topic, but it's a really important one, because if people can feel that they can actually have those conversations, and if there's that actual reality check where you say, oh, actually, we're not doing as well as we need to, presumably it creates a much more collaborative, collegiate environment where people feel it's okay to be vulnerable. Have you found that's the case?
Yes, definitely. And that's often when I help a team, I focus more on getting people working as a team and getting to know each other, whether it's making stupid quizzes about each other or other things like that. That's always what I try. And one of the best things is also just to get people to laugh. So when we have our daily stand-up where we coordinate the day, I always end it with a stupid dad joke. Either I bring one or somebody else brings one, but then people will leave in one of two ways. Either, oh my God, that was horrible, but they still smile when they log out, or they will laugh and think, okay, that was actually quite good. And then we're always already better off, and then slowly building that. When we can start to laugh with each other, then we are a good step along the way.
Yeah, I think the laughter connects, doesn't it? So
yes.
Great. So we've got another question from Lukash, and Lukash asks, are there any structures that make hybrid, as in online and in-room attendees, workshops work better? And this, I suspect, is a challenge that many of us are facing, where you've got some people remote, some people all together in one location, other people all together in another location. Any liberating structures that help with that dynamic, Carsten?
It depends. The worst answer ever, right? No, but some of these structures, for instance, are centered around, if we take critical uncertainties, where we had these 4 quadrants, right? Then if you have some people sitting together, then they probably will need to have their own laptop, because we are using some kind of virtual whiteboard tool nonetheless. And then if we have 1 or 2 persons online and they want to go to a specific quadrant, then you as a facilitator need to make sure that people in that quadrant log on to this online meeting or this breakout room. So what we normally do if we have sessions like that, is we have prepared specific breakout rooms for these different quadrants, for instance. So it's, if you want to join this, click here, and then you can see, okay, everybody in this breakout room is actually in the room. So let's just sign off again and start working on our own together. But hybrid meetings is not always fun.
Yeah. I don't know about you, Carsten, but I've found hybrid meetings require a lot more preparation and thought. Like, if it's completely virtual, I guess we're all kind of used to that now. If it's all in the room, we're all kind of used to it. When it's hybrid, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about with those types of meetings is like equality of experience.
Yes.
You don't want someone to be like the forgotten person on the speakerphone in the old days, when there's like a voice on a speakerphone and someone goes, oh, we've forgotten about you. So
and one of the things that we're also experimenting with in the team I'm part of is, if we have one person online, that's the facilitator of the meeting.
Interesting.
Because then you cannot be ignored, right? So that's what we're doing with team meetings, for instance. So today I was working from home, and Free from the team was in the office, so I was facilitating our team meeting today.
Well, no, there's an interesting dynamic, is having the facilitator. Yeah. This is because we're like collaboratively, we're all learning, and the technology changes and gets better over time for sure. So, one question I've got, Carsten, actually, is you mentioned the website liberatingstructures.com, and you also mentioned the cards. I know there's a book, but I wondered whether there was any other resources that, like, if people are interested, where should they look?
would definitely look at the Liberators, Barry and Christian. Their guides and articles on how to facilitate is some of the best. I have made a lot of videos on liberating structures. I have not made a video for all of the structures. I think I'm missing 3 or 4 of them.
Wow. So you've made like 30 videos. That's awesome.
I have made more than that. But I have a playlist. I'll just put it in the chat here. So that's a playlist with the official structures like shift and share, Tris, heard, seen, respected, with how I would facilitate them. They're not always 100% by the book, but it's how I facilitate them in real life, for better or for worse. I also have one with the non-official liberating structures, like the Matt T or the likes. That is also quite nice. And then I just have a playlist with liberating structures in general. So these design elements, what can we use them for, and stuff like that.
Fantastic. And are there communities of people who use liberating structures? Are there like LinkedIn groups or like communities of practice of people who share knowledge about this stuff?
Yes. Back to the Liberators, they have a liberating structure user groups around the world, and there's actually quite a lot of them. So I would definitely check them out as well. I also shared a link to my own website where you saw these example strings with these agenda cards, where I made a small website where you can generate a PDF and then print it, and then you have the same type of agenda, if that's something.
Fantastic. Oh, was that the cards you were showing us? The
Yes.
Fantastic. So there's the PDF, because that was a question someone had in the chat, was where to get the cards. So
okay, sorry. It's not these cards, but it's the cards on that I simply hang in I use as a Kanban board, both so to doing done, and then introduction and so on. The cards they can be bought different places. So these ones are from Linda from Creative Elephant. So that's I think they can, or at least they can be bought directly from her. Or alternatively, they can also be bought from the Liberators, and there are also smaller ones.
Fantastic. Great. Yeah, Creative Elephant. That's a great name. That's a great name for a company. So excellent. Okay, and then I suppose just as we start to sort of close the session, Carsten, if you had one biggest takeaway or your biggest tip for someone who's perhaps watched this is the first time they've seen Liberating Structures, how would you recommend they get started? Like, what's the 1, 2, or 3 steps you recommend they take sort of immediately?
If the step to take immediately is to try out, for instance, the 1, 2 for all, and see how that dynamic changes quite a lot of things with having people individually first and then in pairs. That is a bigger game changer. Then you might think just when you say it out loud. And when you have mastered that and then or tried out that in different contexts, then play around with Matt T or impromptu networking and start to use it in energizers, because that's the fear of failing or having a bad experience in the energizer is often lower than in the main chunk of a workshop, and then slowly build up your confidence. But that being said, I would always recommend using liberating structures also for the big and complicated parts, because there is something for every situation out there, more or less.
Yeah, and energizers are so important, aren't they? And I find just a quick energizer is often it unleashes the creativity. It almost gets people warmed up and ready, and it kind of breaks through that corporate, I don't know what we'd call it, that like corporate beige, like everything's a bit grey, and then you do something different with people, and they're sort of more open to creativity. So
and it doesn't need to be super serious or anything, right? So we did a retrospective today, for instance. If I just share my screen, then You can see what energizer that was. That's not liberating structures, but that's back to this playful thing. It's not my invention, but it's a beautiful quiz whether it's a cheese or an IKEA product.
Wow.
And you can Google it and then find similar slides, and then you can see, for instance, Smaka, is that a cheese or an IKEA product?
I wouldn't even like to guess.
So it's also a cheese slicer, but it's an entire product line. And again, just having people start to talk about whether or not this is an IKEA product or a cheese, that's like, then you're already halfway there, right?
I'm going to have to be Googling this, and and just there's lots of nice comments in the chat. Leanne was saying, she agrees, give 1, 2, 4 all a go. It will definitely give you courage and confidence to give more structures a go. So thanks, Leanne, for that comment. Michelle says, so many ideas, can't wait to try some, which I think is probably a good place to sort of pause for the session. So Carsten, thank you so much for taking time out to be here today. Such an informative webinar, lots of really good insight. You've already shared your website and your YouTube channel. What I would say to everyone who's here, this is the point where if this was a real event, we'd be giving you a very warm round of applause now. So obviously a very big virtual round of applause. However, I always think a virtual round of applause also involves connecting with the speaker on LinkedIn so you can stay in touch. So I've just put your LinkedIn, address there in the chat. So do connect with Carsten, and I'll put my LinkedIn address in there as well. Any other links you'd like to share? I know you've mentioned your YouTube, your website. Anything else you'd like to share with the people online, Carsten?
No, not what I can think of, at least. And as Adrian also said, feel free to reach out to me or send me a message or comment. That's more than welcome.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all. Thank you very much, Carsten, for a really interesting presentation. If you are on live, just hold on for just a few more minutes. I have just a couple of tiny announcements. The first one is to say that the next BA Community webinar will be on June the 8th at 6:30 UK time. So that's 7:30 Central European time, 8:30 Eastern European time, and 1:30 Eastern time if you're in Canada or the eastern bit of the States, but you'll have to check that because my calculations are not great. But I've managed to secure a Q&A with the authors of a book that came out, I think it came out either yesterday or today, which is Agile from First Principles, because Agile is one of those topics that there's a lot written about, and there's some really good stuff and some perhaps more questionable stuff. This is excellent. This is a fantastic book. If you haven't seen it, I'd recommend it. It's by Lynn Gervin and Simon Gervin. Some of you may know them already. So we're going to have pretty much an interactive Q&A. Again, definitely worth taking a look at this book. It's the kind of book that I would say cuts through some of the fluff of Agile and gets back to some of the really practical stuff. And I really like the fact it's got anti-patterns, like red flags to look out for in there. Anyway, I've only announced this webinar a few days ago and it's really filling up quickly. So if you would like to get there, I'll put the link in the chat. So Caroline says I might have to order some copies of that for our work library. Sounds like a very good idea. So I've put the link in the chat there. As ever, please do pass it on to your colleagues, completely free to attend. If you can't make it, feel free to register, and and as long as you opt in, you'll get sent a copy of the recording as well. A copy of the recording of this session will be available in about 24 hours, so you'll get an email out. Again, feel free, if you've had colleagues who couldn't tune in to see Carsten live, pass the link on and they can share the love that way as well. So that brings us to the very end of the session. So all that's left for me to say is thank you again, Carsten, for a fantastic session. There's so much to think about, literally so much to think about. And a massive thank you to everyone for tuning in, or indeed if you're watching the recording. So until next time, have a fantastic evening, rest of the week, and hope to see you soon. So bye for now. Bye, Carsten. Thanks again.
Bye.